Business athletes, what is going on? Bringing you a new episode today. It's a good one. Insulin sensitivity, the master switch for fat loss, focus, and longevity. Man, this one, even if you don't know what insulin sensitivity is, trust me, by the end of this, you'll know, and I'm going to make this a practical, simple breakdown for you. My goal is always to take these concepts and make them real for you, to basically show you what and where does this apply in your life and what are the levers that you can pull to improve this and what type of ROI do you expect to see by pulling these levers. Because that's the thing. We can talk about science and biology all day, but if it doesn't make sense to you on a visceral level, you won't connect the dots. And I find that's often what happens for people. So let's break this down. I have some notes here. Basically, it's quite an extensive topic. I'm going to keep this to about 45 to 60 minutes long, but I want to break it down and I don't want to miss anything. So I do have some notes here. It's just prompts. I know all the stuff in my head, but there's so many little avenues and little nooks and crannies that I want to go down and explore. I don't want to forget anything. So if for a second I sort of seem to pause, it's because I'm scanning everything and making sure that I don't miss anything for you guys. So insulin sensitivity, or equally also known as insulin resistance, also known as type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes. So what is this? Basically, think of your body and think of this chemical process like this. When you eat food, your body takes those calories and it enters into your gut, and your body breaks down those calories, breaks them down into amino acids and glucose, like basically sugars. Now, that sugar, what it does is it enters your bloodstream. And that's what blood sugar levels are, basically. And your pancreas, which is one of the organs in your body, it releases a hormone called insulin. Many of you guys have probably heard of the hormone insulin. It's what type 1 diabetics literally have to inject themselves with every time they eat to basically metabolize food so they don't die. So your pancreas releases insulin. And insulin's role is to basically come in and grab these glucose molecules that are circulating in your bloodstream, and it pulls them out of your bloodstream. And it's got to figure out where to put them. So it's a bit like a police officer coming in, cleaning up the streets, and grabbing the criminals and taking them off the streets. But it's got to figure out, is there enough room at precinct 1, or do I need to go downtown to another precinct and put this person in another cell? Where should I put them? And for example, your body will have tendencies to either want to allocate and take that sugar and push it into either muscle cells as stored muscle glycogen. I'm going to talk about muscle cells and muscle as a fuel tank very soon. So that's the first one. Or what it does is it will, if the glycogen stores are full or the person's insulin resistant, it might then just shunt some of that sugar into fat cells. So that's how someone gets fat. Basically, someone gets fat because their insulin is driving a lot of that energy in their bloodstream into fat cells. Now, if that keeps happening and you just keep driving energy to those fat cells, eventually what happens is the signal starts to get a bit hazy, resistant. And that's when you will see a rise of blood sugar in your bloodstream. Now, that is what you will be feeling when you feel like you eat and you get foggy. You know, you kind of get hazy, foggy, you can't concentrate. A lot of people that have what they think is ADHD, it's actually insulin resistance. And their blood sugar levels are up and down like a roller coaster. So one of the good things to know is that I would say probably 9 out of 10 of you who think you have ADHD actually are insulin resistant. Honestly, I really do think it's like that type of ratio, which means that to solve that, to have sharper cognition, to have a better mental focus, you actually got to solve a different problem. See, what would happen is you would go to the doctor and they would give you some Ritalin or some Adderall, and that stimulant wouldn't help improve your blood glucose metabolism at all. So you may now feel more wired, you've got a bit more stimulants in your system, but you're not actually addressing the root cause. So that will persist. Now, if you feel foggy, if you feel tired, lethargic, that's often a sign of insulin resistance. There are other things. I mean, for example, even just getting a lot of cravings. I find that when someone is very insulin resistant, it's almost like a vicious cycle where they get a lot more cravings and a lot more hunger. You might get thirsty a lot as well, and you will also urinate a lot too. Now, I realize, obviously, not everyone that drinks a lot and urinates a lot is insulin resistant, but that can sometimes be a symptom. And then other times it can even relate to, it can even affect your sleep. So I say all this because from a business athlete's standpoint, think about this in real terms. So think about you getting up in the morning and your body not being good at processing sugar in your bloodstream, and the real world effect that has on your performance and output and production. So whatever industry you're in, whatever you're doing, even if you're a stay-at-home mother, whether you're a stay-at-home mother or you're a special operator or you're a first responder or you're a dentist or you're an attorney, whatever you are, that's going to have real consequences, because your ability to balance your energy, your ability to be very mentally sharp, your ability to retain a lot of information, have a good memory, your ability to articulate your thoughts very coherently, all comes down to the way your brain works. And the underlying driver of that is often insulin resistance. So I will tell you that not only do you have a vested interest in improving your insulin sensitivity to enhance your performance mentally, but I would be thinking about that from your kid's perspective, from your spouse's perspective, and from your team, your coworkers, because if you want to maximize how people produce, you've got to maximize their brain capacity. So this is a really, really important topic when it comes to production and quality of output. So any of you business owners and CEOs, you've got to take notes with this, because if your staff are insulin resistant, they will not be performing like they could be. Their mental bandwidth will not be as good as it could be. They will have more fog when they're thinking. So just in general, it's kind of like having a computer that your browser is open, but you've got 50 tabs running. And then you try doing anything, and everything just works slow. It might still work, but it works freaking slow. And how are you meant to achieve a lot of stuff when you're in that place, right? So that's the first thing. Outside of just the cognitive effect, if you have type 2 diabetes, it can statistically reduce your lifespan by 10 years. 10 years, guys. And so think about this. The average person in America, I think the average age is usually about 73, which to me is appalling. I mean, 73. Man, I hope I'm just getting started at that point. But think about it. If you are type 2 diabetic, that means that on average, 10 years less. So 63 years old. That's the negative effect that this has. Why? Because what happens is the more insulin resistant you get, basically you start to build up a lot of inflammation in your arterial system. So your blood vessels in your arterial system. I don't know if you know this, but someone who's really type 2 diabetic that's unmanaged, they'll often need to get fingers and toes and hands amputated, literal amputations. Because what happens is there's so much inflammation in the blood vessels, and the circulation and the oxygen gets so impaired that you essentially get gangrene. That's a real thing. Now think about this. If you're type 2 diabetic and you're losing circulation and blood flow to your extremities like your fingers and toes, what do you think that is doing to your brain? You have a ton of capillaries and blood vessels in your brain. What do you think that's doing? What do you think Alzheimer's is and dementia? What do you think that is? Do you think it's just some genetic anomaly that people get out of bad luck? Did you know that they now think Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes? So this has a massive effect on your brain health long term. Now, if you're young still and you're thinking, oh, that's way off in the distance, lay down the foundation now, because I promise you, you will be so thankful that you did. And for anyone that's listening to this, if you have a parent or a grandparent or you know someone in their 60s and 70s onwards, this topic is very important for them. It's very important because this will literally keep their mind intact. Once the mind starts to go, quality of life is just appalling to me. I've seen this. So I wanted to preface all of this by saying that, because you might just hear these terms and be like, whatever, it's just some blood marker that I get, to check off my insurance policy, and, it's just to make sure I'm not dead. No, this affects performance in many ways. And I will say, it makes fat loss more difficult too. So if you are insulin resistant, think of it almost like a locking mechanism on your body fat. So your body is more resistant to losing body fat. So the work that you put in, it doesn't actually give you the ROI you want. That's why people burn out. But if the cool part is that if you can get very insulin sensitive, which I'm going to tell you all the tactics I do, because I'm very, very insulin sensitive, and I've got it in my blood work data. So, and the reason, again, why this is useful is because it gets very, very easy to stay lean. And you will absolutely have very sharp cognition. And I've noticed that that's just benefited me tremendously when it comes to business. I can retain and remember all these podcast episodes I do with you guys. I can remember all the stuff off the top of my head. I can remember dosing for different peptides, milligram dosing for different supplements, everything. Because obviously I teach it a lot, but when your brain is really healthy, you do have a massive capacity for retaining stuff. And just think about that when it comes to selling or communicating. All of that's going to help you become a better leader, a better communicator, a better parent, a better spouse. I mean, that's exactly why we are here. So when you are thinking about what insulin resistance really is, basically the cells stop responding to insulin, and that's what causes glucose to stay elevated. As glucose stays elevated, the pancreas has to work harder to push out more insulin, and eventually that leads to burnout, fat gain, and inflammation. And basically, that's what type 2 diabetes is. At that point, if it's bad, you'll have to use a drug like metformin. And if it gets really bad, you will even need to use insulin, the peptide, insulin, to actually control your blood sugar levels. And at that point, you will not be in a good place. Typically, you can tell when someone is very diabetic because usually they will have a certain body type, especially I find for men, usually a big barrel gut. So there's a lot of visceral fat. The midsection's definitely a high level of body fat, but they have thin arms and legs and even a thin face. Now, obviously, you're going to have people who are just fat across the board. But that initial body type that I told you about, that's the one that I would argue often goes undetected or ignored, because someone looks at a person and they're wearing a big baggy polo shirt and they've got thin arms, thinner legs, their face isn't super fat, but they have a ton of visceral fat through the midsection, they have a big barrel gut, and that's what basically metabolic syndrome is. So insulin resistance, in a way, is what they call metabolic syndrome. Now, obviously, if someone is just really obese across the board, that will also be a sign. I would imagine it's physiologically impossible to be obese and not have a massive insulin resistance. And so just by virtue of you losing weight and getting the body fat off, you will literally improve your insulin sensitivity just by that fact alone. Now, when it comes to knowing how to test, like, how do you know, right? Like, you might be like, Fraser, I hear you, I get it. How do I know, what do I test, right? So the first thing that you can do is you can even do at-home blood glucose testing. So if you go to a pharmacy, CVS, Walgreens, a lot of the grocery stores will have a little pharmacy section, and they'll usually have a diabetic section. And that will have those little blood prick strips. And basically you have a little glucose monitor. You prick your finger and you put some blood on the strip, and it will give you a reading of what your blood glucose level is. Now, obviously this is just a snapshot in time. Your blood glucose levels is going to alternate and undulate based on when you ate, what you ate, how stressed you are, how much caffeine you just consumed, if you're fasting, etc. But it can give you an idea. Let's say, for example, you wake up in the morning and you're in a fasted state because you haven't eaten all night. And in theory, your blood glucose level should be reasonably low in the morning when you haven't eaten. But you get it tested and you're up at like 150. That's definitely a sign that you probably have some type of insulin resistance and blood glucose instability. Now, obviously, you could test it multiple times through the day. So you could test it before meals, after meals, and between, and get like an average, get a trend. And typically, the normal range, this is a good example with the blood work, they typically will say, well, anything below 100 is normal. And remember, like I've said in other episodes, I talk about detailed blood work in episode 3, I believe, where I said just because something is normal does not mean it's optimal. You got to realize that. The amount of times that I have someone say, oh, this hormone or this thing was normal, and then I'm like, well, show me, and they show me, and it's within the normal range, but it's incredibly suboptimal. So I would say you want to see a fasting glucose average of probably down around 70 to 75, probably 70 to 80, 75 the sweet spot. Now most people are over 100, and if you're 95, you're considered normal. But I would say at that point, unless you ate, a fasted level at 95 is probably running a little bit high. Now, that's the first thing to know, is that fasting glucose level. But one of the challenges that a lot of physicians will do is they'll just run that. That's it. They'll just run fasting glucose. And imagine just running that as like having 10 pieces of a 100-piece jigsaw puzzle and being expected to figure out what the puzzle image is. You're not going to figure out what the image is with 10 pieces if it's a complex image, which insulin sensitivity is. So there's a lot of things that are missing. They don't even test. And I can usually tell how skillful and proficient a primary care physician is based on the things that they test. If they just test fasting glucose, I'm like, you need to fire that doctor and find a new one. So generally, I'll rattle these off for you, but you want to focus on fasting glucose, fasting insulin, HOMA IR, so HMOA-IR, which is an insulin resistance score, HbA1c, triglycerides, HDL, ALT liver enzymes, uric acid, and ApoB, small particle LDL. Now, all of those would give you an idea of how much metabolic syndrome you have. Insulin resistance, think of it as like one part of metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome is almost like the umbrella term for someone that has high everything, high fasting glucose levels, high insulin, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, so fat in their bloodstream. So they not only have a lot of fat in their bloodstream through triglycerides, they have high cholesterol, ApoB, and they have high insulin resistance levels. Those three things compound, they stack on each other. And that is like, basically your body's just super inflamed. You're never going to feel good when you have that level of inflammation in your system. You will feel terrible across the board. And so the good thing, though, is that you can fix this. I don't care who's told you that type 2 diabetes is just genetic. That's nonsense. It's not. It's environmental. You can pull the right levers and make yourself very insulin sensitive. So that's why I'm sharing this with you, because I wouldn't just want to ramble on this for 60 minutes and give you nothing to go on with this. I want to show you that, hey, this stuff, you can solve it, you can optimize it. Even if you don't have diabetes per se, I guarantee most of you have insulin resistance. And by improving the numbers, you will improve your body composition and your cognitive output. So just make sure that those blood markers that I mentioned, make sure that you request those. What I would tell you is check the show notes of the podcast, because in there I even put in a download for my blood work blueprint stuff. So in there you can go get the breakdown of the biomarkers that I typically request that I think you absolutely should have. So because you need to know your data. You've got to know your numbers. So when it comes to insulin resistance and the brain and cognitive effects, the brain runs on glucose, right? So the brain runs on sugar. And insulin resistance is poor glucose uptake. So if your uptake of sugar to your brain is impaired, basically your brain is running on less energy. What does that even mean? Guys, that's what brain fog is. That's what poor focus and low motivation is. Like I said, if you let that go for years, that's what dementia and especially Alzheimer's is. So if you have a parent or a friend that has the genetic coding for Alzheimer's, they need to make sure that they absolutely drill down on their insulin sensitivity and really manage these levers. And like I said, I'm going to give you the tactics and the things to do, but I've got to preface all the mechanics around this first so you can really understand when I'm giving you the tools and the tactics, it makes sense and you know what it's doing and what to expect. So with insulin resistance, I really focus on this from an operator's standpoint. This is real business athlete performance stuff where when you improve this, or when it's not good, you'll notice your energy crashes, especially after meals, that mid-afternoon snack, or that mid-afternoon nap that you need to take, that's part of it. But coming into snacking, you will notice your hunger increases. You will feel hungry a lot. You'll get a lot of sugar cravings. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. I do. But anytime you have a day where you ate kind of poorly, say think of like a Thanksgiving, for example, you eat a lot of calories, but you eat kind of sloppy. Very often, the next day, you'll actually feel more hungry. It's kind of a strange thing to think. Why am I feeling more hungry if I just ate a bunch of calories the day before? Shouldn't my brain be sending a signal, hey, we've got a lot of stored energy from yesterday, turn off the hunger signal? No, because it's a hormonal thing. That energy, that craving response is a blood glucose instability hormonal response that's in part driven by ghrelin and leptin, which are hunger suppressing and hunger triggering hormones. So ghrelin increases when you've had blood sugar instability, and that drives up your hunger response. So it's almost like a vicious cycle that when someone is very insulin resistant, they feel hungry a lot. So it's unfortunate because it basically punishes you. It's like a negative feedback loop. But the good thing is that as you pull the right levers and build out the right systems, that craving signal goes down a lot and it makes it a lot more manageable long term. At this point now, I don't get cravings. I don't. And the hunger is very manageable. And so I say this because that you can look forward to that. The way you feel right now is not the way you're always going to feel. But like the plane taking off the runway, you've got to build enough momentum and enough speed to get up into the air and actually ascend up into the airstreams. Otherwise, you just keep taxing the runway. You never get anywhere. And that's what most people do. They do it for a week, and then they burn out. And they do it for a week and burn out. So they never actually give themselves enough time under the belt. That's why I'm telling you guys, for anyone who's not in my Anomaly Project 6-week signature course, or my Business Athlete Council, or getting some one-on-one with me, get some help from some professional, especially who has well-versed protocols when it comes to insulin sensitivity. This is a huge part of what I do. I've had people that came to me as type 2 diabetics literally reverse the type 2 diabetes. And I've seen people in blood work they were very, very insulin resistant, and they were overweight, and they were having all these negative effects, and able to completely clean it up without any medications through diet and sort of over-the-counter supplementation, which is freaking amazing. Other things that you can experience with insulin resistance is definitely a heightened amount of belly fat. So belly fat and visceral fat, that midsection fat, it's that pot belly basically. Poor recovery, because your muscles are not getting the glycogen as effectively because the insulin's not pushing that sugar into muscle cells as effectively, you just don't get the same recovery. It's pushing it into fat cells, not good. And with all of this, mood swings. Because when your body's trying to manage sugar and it's going up and down like a roller coaster, it's going to have a really negative effect on your dopamine signaling and your neurochemistry. And that will have a real world effect on your mood. And I always say to people, your ability to moderate your nervous system and your mood is like a superpower. You do that and you can basically achieve almost anything because you're in a place where you can problem solve really productively and you're not getting weighed down by a bunch of stressful stuff like the average person is. So that is like energetic currency to a business athlete. In terms of hormones and women first, and then obviously we'll touch on hormones and men. Hormones with women, this is really important to know, that insulin is sort of like an ovarian signaling system, that when a female is insulin resistant, it often can start to drive PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome. And coupled with that, you'll often see an elevation in testosterone. And so generally I find women that are very insulin resistant or diabetic will have PCOS and they'll have high levels of testosterone. I've actually seen it to the point where they start to masculinize. They start to get like little bits of facial hair. Their voice deepens. They start to get the effect of high testosterone because they have so much insulin resistance. The main thing that happens though is it can really affect your menstrual cycle. And that really gets magnified if someone is going through menopause, those hormonal shifts during peri or menopausal changes. So you'll notice that you start to get a irregular cycle. It's not on a normal 4-week clock. And that's when you also see fertility issues. And it's when you see a lot of mood swings and just you start to feel the magnification of those menopausal changes, like a lot of hot flashes, heart rate increases, you might have some insomnia, your mood starts to tank, you feel tired a lot, that stuff, it's real. And the good thing is that by improving your insulin sensitivity, you can really start to normalize those hormonal cascades. Now, obviously, there's a whole other topic around hormone systems, and I will be covering more on that in different episodes because that's a whole topic in and of itself. But what I would tell you is that really important for the ladies to improve insulin sensitivity for all of the reasons that I just mapped out. Now, in terms of men, it will suppress testosterone. Straight out of the gate, I've noticed that men that are obese or pretty overweight, you generally, almost always, their testosterone is in the gutter. It's super low. Now, what also happens is estrogen goes up because body fat does what's called aromatization of estrogen. So body fat will literally start to produce more estrogen. And what I notice with guys that are obese or overweight, they start to almost feminize. You know, they literally get what's called gynecomastia. I mean, the street term for that is bitch tits. That's literally, it's essentially breast tissue. And they start to feminize their face. You will notice that their facial features look quite demasculined, feminine. Pay attention to that. That's a real thing. The long-term exposure to elevations of estrogen because someone is type 2 diabetic, it will literally make them become more female. So this stuff, and think about the psychological effect that has on brain chemistry. Because when you have higher levels of estrogen and low testosterone, that's going to have a huge effect on your drive and your grit and your libido and your mood, everything. Testosterone doesn't just affect muscle mass. It literally has an effect on your drive. So how tenacious and gritty someone is does tie into testosterone. So especially as a business athlete, I mean, you have to cultivate a level of discipline and grit and tenacity to just navigate the challenges of business. And this is a key part of it. So you can see here how there's all these downstream effects. It's not just body fat. It's a cascade of different reactions. That the downstream damage, in a summary, with insulin resistance, it's going to be fatty liver, so non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is a big deal. Cardiovascular disease because of all the inflammation and lack of oxygen in your system. Brain degeneration, Alzheimer's, dementia. Just systemic inflammation through the body so you don't recover as well. Accelerated aging, like I said, that 10-year reduction. Massive mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria are like the batteries of your cells. And as we age, those batteries start to lose their charge, and that's what makes someone feel more tired and more lethargic. Now, there's a lot of things you can do to improve mitochondrial function. Again, so this is why this stuff is absolutely key. So let's dive into the mechanics. Let's give you some levers to pull, some tactics, because these problems are solvable. But you've got to have a good plan. You've got to solve problems in the right order, and you've got to be patient and persistent and stick with it and do it in an environment where people will challenge you, push you, and hold you to a higher standard. So the first thing, right out of the gate, nice and easy, is walking. Walking. So post-meal walking, massive improvements in insulin sensitivity. And even doing 20 bodyweight squats. So typically if someone's very insulin resistant, I will tell them that after they eat to do 20 bodyweight squats and go take a 10-minute walk. Now that would be a base case scenario. The reason why I'm so insulin sensitive is because I literally have a walking pad and a standing desk, and I'm walking right now while I do this show for you. And I will walk all day while I'm coaching and consulting. And I've got a number of students who have adopted this practice. And that is one of the most powerful levers for fat loss and improving insulin sensitivity that there is. Simple walking. Now, I would tell you, in fact, walking is such a potent lever. Episode 2 of the Business Athlete Podcast was on walking and NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's been a game changer for me. Because think about this. The reason why walking is so useful for blood sugar levels is because when you walk and move your legs, you're flexing and contracting your muscles. By contracting and flexing your muscles, when you have that sugar in your bloodstream, it pushes it into the muscle cells that are contracting. So if you eat and then you just sit on your butt, your body will typically just push the energy into fat stores. Or it will let it sit in your bloodstream and you'll just sit there with brain fog. Whereas if you walk, that muscle activation, that flexing, think of like muscles like a sponge. Think of muscles a bit like a sponge on a kitchen bench. So if you have a sponge and it's dry, like it hasn't been mopping anything up, that sponge is dry. And if you spill some water, you can take that sponge and you can mop up the mess and clean it all up. That mopping up action is like you walking. So when you have all that blood sugar in your system, aka the water spill, that dry sponge comes along and soaks up all that water. Your muscle comes along through contracting and soaks up all that muscle, that sugar, that glucose. That's how you push the sugar into your muscle cells. Your muscle cells are like giant fuel tanks. See, people don't realize this. Think of all the muscles in your body like fuel tanks on a vehicle. It's like a long-range fuel tank. So that's also why building muscle is so important for insulin sensitivity. Because if you're skinny fat and you don't resistance train, it will be very, very difficult to improve your insulin sensitivity. Because you're not building any muscle tissue and you're not firing the muscles to turn them into those dry sponges to soak up the calories. What happens is if you're consuming a lot of sugar and things like that, and you have all these water spills everywhere, but you're not activating your muscles, it's like your muscles are already full. So imagine trying to mop up a mess with a wet sponge. Have you ever tried doing that? You just push it everywhere. It just goes all over the place. It doesn't clean anything up. That's what happens if you don't train or activate your muscles. And then it just sits in your bloodstream. So the sugar sits in your bloodstream, and that's when it's very dangerous. That's when you can literally die if it got out of control. That's how bad it can get. It could literally kill you. Now, obviously, before that happens, you'll just gain a bunch of body fat, and that's when you get a ton of brain fog and you'll feel terrible. So I say this because this is a serious thing that you do need to really take note of and make an effort to improve this. So first thing is walking. I typically tell people to walk between 12 and 15,000 steps per day. Generally speaking, between 5 and 20 minutes at some point in the morning and then at some point late in the afternoon. So outdoor walking is really good for mitochondrial health. It's good for sleep patterns, all that stuff. So I schedule in a 5 to 20 minute walk morning, afternoon based on time constraints. Outside of that, I would be peppering in little bursts of walking throughout the day. Don't allow yourself to sit for extended periods of time. That's not a good idea. You will struggle to lose body fat and get lean if you're sitting on your butt all day. Even if you train hard in the morning and you do a bunch of cardio in the morning, you will still struggle to get lean if you don't pepper in movement throughout your day. So again, that's why I have a walking pad with a standing desk, because I would rather chip away at that step count through the day methodically all day long around my meals and become very insulin sensitive than to try and jam in walking. You know, let's say you've been sitting on your butt all day. This is a classic case. You sit on your butt all day and then you get to dinner time and you realize you're only at 5,000 steps. So then you bust your butt trying to get, another 10,000 steps in. So you're power walking out at nighttime in the dark, in the cold. You can't sustain that long term. That's a silly thing to do. Like you need to front load your day and you need to spread that action out throughout the day rather than letting it all accumulate till the end of the day and then you're frantically trying to cross a finish line. That's stressful, and all it will take is 1 or 2 challenging days and you'll just quit. So you've got to front load your day and pepper the steps throughout your day. If you have to set an alarm reminder to go take a 5-minute walk every hour just to reset your system, do it. Do it. So walking is a potent tool. Do not underestimate that. I would tell you in the morning when you get up, within the first 30 minutes of you waking, get on a walking pad and take a 30-minute walk. Listen to a podcast, watch a YouTube video, read your Bible, do whatever you want to do. But walk early. That's a great way to sort of reset your system to enhance your insulin sensitivity right out of the gate. The second thing is resistance training. Like I mentioned, muscles are like fuel tanks. Being skinny fat, you're going to be insulin resistant. That's why the ladies don't shy away from lifting weights, because the more muscle you can build, it improves, like I said, your ability to manage blood glucose levels, and that's going to help get you leaner long term. And you won't run into all these issues with PCOS and like a ton of belly fat and all that stuff that people face. So I would be saying, and remember, the bigger the muscle groups, the bigger the metabolic ROI. So it's why, for me personally, I will typically do leg training 2 times a week and back training 2 times a week, because legs and back are big muscle groups. And so the ROI of stimulating those big muscle groups like your quads, your thighs, or your lats and your back, massive insulin sensitivity enhancing response. Whereas if you just train a bunch of abs or do a bunch of bicep curls, that still is useful, but it's much smaller muscle groups, so a much smaller ROI in terms of insulin signaling. So think to yourself, resistance training, big muscle groups, 2 times a week. Sometimes doing full body workouts or upper body, lower body workouts can be a great idea. So it really just depends on your time constraints and your level of skill. Again, this is why getting into my rotation with me is probably a good idea, because wherever you're at in your journey, it will probably require a different strategy. Like for a woman that's going through menopause or has gone through that, the type of training that you will want to do looks very different than the training you would have done when you were 20 years old. It looks different. It's got to be a different stress response. And I would even say for the men, as we age, we've got to be smarter with how we train, because very often you don't recover as fast. So you need to be able to create progressive overload without injuring yourself. Again, all of this stuff we would map out in my Business Athlete Council or in my Anomaly Project course. So resistance training, I would say 3 to 6 times per week, focusing on big muscle groups, between 8 to 15 repetitions per set. I typically like to use machines, cables, Smith machine, especially if you're training by yourself, because you can strategically get closer to mechanical failure safely, which helps prevent injuries. Again, very, very important. So if you add in walking in conjunction with resistance training, doing some supersets or drop sets, back-to-back sort of work where you're keeping the rest periods kind of short depending on the person, that can be useful. So just think of muscle as basically like a metabolic fuel tank. It's like a sugar fuel tank. And the more muscle mass you have, the bigger your fuel tanks. So your body will handle all that sugar really effectively, and it won't just sit in your bloodstream and give you brain fog, right? And that's also where I say doing the NEAT, so the non-exercise activity thermogenesis, the walking or the rucking, is much better than doing a bunch of hardcore high-intensity cardio stuff. When you're a business athlete, you face a lot of stress. Mental stress, financial stress, you name it. There's nothing wrong with doing a bit of high-intensity interval training. I do a little bit of zone 2 cardio. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I will say is that stuff is another stress factor on your system. So if you're not careful, you're just adding more stress to the stress bucket. Like a good example is that you might have a woman or a guy and they've got some hormonal issues, they're not recovering well, and if they add a bunch of high-intensity interval training and they do a bunch of hard drop sets or supersets with like short rest, and they are jumping in cold plunges as well, they're doing like a bunch of stressful things, that stress will compound on top of all the business and financial and life stress you face, and that will de-optimize your system even more. One of the main reasons why people get a lot of cravings and excessive hunger is because the way they train is driving up their stress response, and it's actually making them more insulin resistant, and that drives up that hunger response, like I said. I've often seen this with people that do CrossFit, for example. It's so much high-intensity work, it increases their appetite, so then they need to train even harder to lose the body fat because they're increasing their calories because they're driving up the hunger response. Whereas the good thing about walking is it's the opposite. It's very therapeutic. It's actually calming on the nervous system. It's calming on the nervous system. It helps improve digestion. It's such a good recovery and fat loss tool. And the benefit, like I said, is maximizing that insulin signaling, which I think is the key. I walk, like I said, probably 20,000 steps a day. And it's not even hard at this point. I just plod along at 1 mile an hour and just through the day while I'm working. And I don't have to go power walk in the middle of the night to hit my step count. And my fasting insulin is down at about 3, which is actually considered low because my body's so efficient at pushing sugar into my muscle cells that it doesn't require much insulin at all to make it happen. So my insulin number is very low. That's what you actually want. And again, insulin is a classic example, and hemoglobin A1C, of how the range is quite wide. So the range in insulin is anywhere from, say, like 5 through to 25. If someone's 10 or 15, that's terrible. That's not good. That's not normal to me. That's very substandard. And yet you would be considered normal, and your physician would say everything's fine. And you still don't feel good. When you don't feel good and they tell you that everything's normal, it's because they're not focusing on optimal ranges. They're focusing on normal ranges. And the same thing is true for hemoglobin A1C. I bet you many of you guys have had your hemoglobin A1C tested, and I would tell you anything above 5.2 to me is unacceptable. 5.1 is not even great. I would say 4.8 to 5. So that range of 4.8 to 5 is the Goldilocks zone where you are very insulin sensitive and you're in that sweet spot where you perform like a total operator. Yet if you're creeping up to 5.3, 5.4, 5.5, that's still normal. Anything I think below 5.6 is considered normal. But that's right on the cusp of being pre-diabetic. To me, that's not where you want to be. Do you want to be normal or do you want to be truly optimal, superhuman? Do you want to be a business athlete, or do you just want to operate like a normie, right? So you got to ask yourself those things. So all of that stuff that I just mentioned helps with improving insulin sensitivity. Another thing is sauna. So regular sauna exposure and even cold immersion. So cold plunge, sauna exposure, both help. Now, what you'll notice with sauna or cold is that when you do it acutely, your blood sugar level spikes up, and that is normal. It's called hormetic stress, where a short burst of physiological stress actually creates long-term improvements. So if you do sauna regularly, if you do cold plunge regularly, in the right context, if your stress bucket isn't spilling over, you can actually see improvements in insulin sensitivity by using those tools. That's the amazing part, that you can improve this by doing things outside of your diet and exercise. Now, when it comes to diet, this is a big part of it. This is a big part of it. You can do all that training stuff that I just mentioned, but if your diet's full of junk and sugar, it will be very hard for you to optimize this stuff. So the first thing that I'll tell you is you got to opt for a whole food diet. Foods with one ingredient, right? Blueberries are just blueberries. Broccoli is just broccoli. If you can opt for 90+% of your diet as foods with one ingredient, and you can combine them in a macro bowl, for example, like episode 11, I did all about macro bowls. That is the model you want to adopt, and you want to focus on 90+% of your diet as foods with one ingredient. You do that, and right away, you're already going to be at a massive advantage. Now, one of the confusing things that people often are unsure about is how much carbohydrates they should consume. The first thing that I'll tell you is that not all carbohydrates are created equal. So refined carbohydrates, that's what will negatively impact your blood glucose level a lot more. Whole food carbohydrates, and there's different varies. So like the glycemic index, GI, is essentially an index of where a carbohydrate sits on a spectrum. So high glycemic index carbohydrates, all the way down to low glycemic index carbohydrates, it's a range. And so I'll give you an example. So something like a zucchini or spaghetti squash is low on the glycemic index scale. Something like dextrose or medjool dates, so medjool dates or juice, is high on the glycemic index scale. The best way to know if this is an issue for you is literally tell ChatGPT all the different foods you eat on a daily basis and ask it to rank them on the glycemic index scale and say, hey, is there any foods here that are really high on the glycemic index scale? Because there is more than likely things you're consuming that are high and that will be proliferating insulin resistance in you. What I will tell you is that this is a process. So some people will say, oh, fruits are bad. This is why a lot of people say fruits are bad for you, because there's sugar and it affects blood glucose level. And you've got the whole keto crowd that talk about ketogenic diets and how, you just want to consume fat and not consume any carbohydrates. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole too hard on that, but I will say that there's different types of ketogenic diets. I'm more of a fan of a ketogenic diet that's high in monounsaturated fat and lower in saturated. Because saturated fat, in the wrong person that's sensitive, comes with its own world of problems. It comes with its own challenges. Now, saturated fat's going to be a lot of like animal-based fats, coconut oil, ghee, butter, stuff like that. Monounsaturated is going to be things like extra virgin olive oil, avocado, whole olives, hemp seed, salmon, that type of stuff. So there is a difference. Now, if you are someone that is already insulin resistant, as it stands, you do have a sensitivity to even healthier carbohydrates initially at first. So a good example of this is that if you are insulin resistant and you eat some fruit, if you eat an orange, that will drive up your blood glucose level initially. But the more you lose body fat, the more you weight train, the more you walk, The more you pull all these levers I'm talking about, the less junk food you eat, the more the whole food your diet is, over time, your body will get better and better at managing that sugar in your system, even from the fruit. So that's the first thing that you want to focus on and realize that it's something that will change with time. The next component of this is you want to focus on protein-forward meals. So I generally find that if someone is undershooting their protein and their carbohydrates and fats a bit higher, which is I find is quite common in women, that will not help. As a base, you need to be getting about 1 gram of protein per pound of target body weight. So if you're 130 pounds, but you're getting 90 grams of protein, that's, in my opinion, not good. You need to sort that out, and you need to get more intentional, because you're just going to keep proliferating that insulin resistance, and it's going to make you want to sleep and nap and snack. You gotta prioritize that. So protein-forward meals first. The next component is attaching a lot of fibrous vegetables to as many of your meals as you can. Think of fibrous vegetables. I say eat the rainbow, right? In my macro bowl episode, I talk all about eating the rainbow. So, where's your green, where's your red, where's your orange vegetable? All that fiber in your diet basically helps control how fast sugar hits your bloodstream. So if you were to just drink some juice, that's why drinking like a fruit juice is not necessarily ideal. Because if someone drinks like a whole fruit juice, there's no fiber in it, and all that sugar just hits your bloodstream like a spike. And that spike is what causes the crash, and that crash is what causes the inflammation. Whereas if you have some fiber attached to it, like in a smoothie, like if you were to blend up some protein, and in there you do some banana or some berries in there, but you throw some spinach or something in there too, that extra fiber, and even the soluble fiber in the fruit, will slow down the blood glucose spike. It will make it a much more stable arc, and that's what you want. You want stability as much as possible. So make sure that with pretty much all your meals where possible, is there some fiber attached to this? So consume protein and fiber ideally first. Anytime I eat a meal, I'll usually have a little bit of protein and fiber first, and then I'll start to eat the whole range of stuff. It's not a huge big deal, but obviously a little bit of that structure, it's not going to hurt you. So I think it's really important to know that that is the first thing to focus on. The other component of this is people will say carbs are bad. The timing is what matters. This is key. So what you will find is that you don't have to eliminate all carbohydrates from your diet, but first of all, go for all the low glycemic index carbohydrates, like the zucchinis, like the spaghetti squash, like the cucumbers, like the broccoli and kale microgreens. All that stuff's good for you. That's not going to have a negative effect on your blood glucose level. In fact, it's going to help stabilize it from the fiber. But you want to time when you consume your carbohydrates. So think about this. I think the best time to consume carbohydrates is either right before, during, or right after you work out, lifting weights. Probably for most people, just after. So, for example, that's why I'm a big fan of doing blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, goji berries right after I train. Because, like I've said, remember, when you activate your muscles, you're basically burning the sugar out of those muscles. Like, in order for your muscles to contract and do work, you're going to burn through glycogen. That glycogen is stored muscle sugars. As you burn through more of those, you need to basically replace them to still perform at a high level. If you want to be a business athlete, you've got to fuel your system for performance. And so when you tap into those stored glycogen tanks, your ability to then replace and reload that glycogen for the next workout is what's going to help you with your performance. So I tell people, if you're going to consume fruits or anything like that, consume them either during or right after you train. I will usually get people to do almost like a carb calorie cycle, where on the days they lift weights and train, they push in a little bit more fruits after their workout, and on the days where they're just active resting and they're just walking, just go lower. Just don't add as much in. as you get more insulin sensitive and as you build more muscle, you can incorporate more of these things in. So it's a good thing to look forward to, is that you're not going to forever be stuck without doing this stuff. So I would definitely say that the timing is important. Backload it into workout sessions. And it's really important to recognize the biggest culprits. So the biggest culprits are going to be all your processed junk, stuff that has an ingredient label and that has a shelf life. Like it's preserved. So stuff that has a long shelf life, that's in the middle aisles of the grocery store, that's got a big ingredient label, like your baked goods, your cookies, your cereals, all that stuff. You got to minimize those things. If I find a lot of people, especially the older generation, they eat a lot of toast and cereal and bread sandwiches and things. That's not conducive with becoming very, very insulin sensitive. Now, the odd bit of that, it's okay, but it shouldn't be a daily staple, because otherwise you're just going to be fighting yourself uphill. So I would say that sticking to foods with one ingredient, right? One ingredient, like brown rice is just brown rice. Quinoa is just quinoa. Even if you consume those things, it's going to have a much better blood glucose response than if you eat like a piece of white refined bread. So you got to remember that not all carbohydrates are created equal, and some actually are good for you. And remember, it's not just the carbohydrates too, it's the package deal. What's coming with it? For example, if someone is needing if a woman is needing more iron in their bloodstream and they're getting some digestive issues, doing a couple of prunes after their workout, prune is fruit sugar, that can actually be good for them, because not only are they getting a bit of muscle glycogen, but now they're getting a little bit of iron intake, and they're getting something that can aid in their digestion. So that's how I approach everything I do. I'm not just thinking about the carbohydrates. I'm not just thinking about the protein. What is the package that it's coming in? What is the package deal? When you really want to optimize, you must think in terms of package deal. And that's how I get to the point where I'm performing at such a high level, and I stay lean like I do, and my energy's good all day, because every single calorie I consume has a maximum ROI. That's the biggest difference. So I would say, outside of the processed, refined carbohydrate stuff, the higher glycemic index stuff, liquid calories. This is another area you've got to get it under. If you're just drinking orange juice, or you're adding just sugary drinks, that is just it's gonna set you up to struggle, because it's straight sugar. Unless, the only time that would be even remotely ideal is if you're training and you need something while you're training, or you are already more advanced and you have more muscle mass and you really want to drive performance while you're training. But even in that case, that's when I'd be doing something like coconut water. I do coconut water mixed with a bit of beet juice and maybe a pinch of sea salt. And I find that is a good intra-workout glycogen driver. Now, again, it depends on the person. I would not get someone who's obese or overweight to do that. So you got to remember, the context is everything. The context of when you consume carbohydrates, what you consume. Don't forget food sensitivity testing, because you might have a list of carbohydrates that you think are good for you, but if you have a sensitivity to half of them, you're going to still be getting brain fog and issues from those sensitivities. So you got to make sure that you cross those T's and you dot your I's. But the main culprits are definitely ultra-processed foods. I mean, in America, there's just so much garbage that it's toxic. And what I would tell you is you have to find what I call healthy food upgrades. So healthy food upgrades are something that kind of replaces the vice. For example, if someone's drinking a lot of soft drinks and sugary drinks, doing like Zevia soda waters is a game changer. If someone's drinking a lot of juice, kids, don't get your kids off juice. It's terrible for them. Get some stir flavored water drops and add stir to their water. It's a stevia-based flavored drink mix. It's great. I use it almost every day. 0 calories and normal on blood glucose response. You got to find replacements for things. Even things like brownies, cookies, that type of thing. So there's a product brand called Macro Mike. They're based out of Australia. But Macro Mike have a protein-focused, low allergen baking mix range. Brownies, cupcakes, donuts. And sure, it's going to have some type of blood glucose effect because it does have some carbohydrates in it. But it's much, much cleaner and a much lower inflammatory profile. So again, in my in my Anomaly Project course and in my Business Athlete Council, I talk about healthy food upgrades all the time. All the time. I've pretty much found replacements for everything because I found that you cannot just white knuckle your way to optimal health. If there's things you enjoy, the chance of you stopping them forever is very low. And rather than doing a quote unquote cheat meal, I think cheat meals at this point are terrible. I think it's better to find healthy food upgrades so you can have a Macro Mike donut or a Macro Mike mug cake and you get that little sweet kick. Or you make some banana ice cream using a chocolate protein powder and it's like soft serve ice cream and you can have a little bit of that for dessert. It's based with banana. And obviously a little bit of banana is a lot better than a pint of Ben & Jerry's, right? So you got to remember, like, solve problems in the right order. So I would say that ultra-processed foods, finding healthy food upgrades, liquid calories, that if you get rid of that crap, you're already winning. And then if you would add in 90+% of your diet with foods with one ingredient, drilling down on the macro bowl concept from episode 11, adding in 12 to 15,000 steps a day, weight training 3 to 6 times per week, holy moly, you will see massive long-term changes. But you got to stick with it. You can't just do this for a week and expect to untangle years of insulin resistance. It's going to take time and persistence and your ability to manage your stress. There's a psychological component to this too. If you're a stressed out hot mess, that will drive up your cortisol response and that's going to trigger a blood glucose spike. So people that typically run high blood glucose constantly, they're usually pretty stressed people, aka most business owners, right? So that's also where the mindset game is key. Now, a couple of last things that I think is really important to touch on is supplementation. I'm just going to rattle this off because I don't want this episode to go on too long. But some of the key supplements I like is berberine or dihydroberberine, Ceylon cinnamon, Spring Dragon longevity tea, as well as chromium. Protein shakes are obviously a good addition to hit your protein count because anything that's got more protein in it is going to help with blood glucose stability. And then even peptides like GLP-3, aka retatrutide. But again, I talk about peptides and retatrutide in the Business Athlete Council. I've got an episode on peptides in this podcast. Go listen to that because that's a whole other world. It's a whole other thing. But I would say for the average person, even starting with berberine or dihydroberberine and Spring Dragon longevity tea and then Ceylon cinnamon, adding cinnamon to your protein shakes, putting cinnamon on your fruit, that is a game changer. So I would highly suggest you do that. The thing you got to remember is that you can be doing a lot of these things, but if you're chronically stressed, if you're frenetic and spread thin mentally and disorganized and anxious, that mental stress is going to drive up insulin resistance. I talk about setting boundaries and I talk about psychology so much in these episodes, so go back and listen to them all. Because even if you do all these things, if you're a frenetic, manic individual, like a lot of professionals tend to be, that's how you've achieved so much in your business and financial stuff. But it's also the weak link in the chain when it comes to your health. So you got to learn how to toggle that switch on and off. Even poor sleep. Poor sleep really affects insulin resistance. And you see this in blood continual glucose monitoring. So I've worn what's called a CGM before, a continual glucose monitor. There's a brand called Levels that does CGMs. And basically what it does is a little electrode that just inserts just under your skin, and it continually measures your blood glucose changes. And what you'll find is that in the data, when someone was sleep deprived, their average glucose level is way higher. It runs higher as a baseline. So straight away, we know that sleep is like a metabolic resetting. I cannot tell you enough how much it is worth focusing on optimizing sleep. And in fact, I'm going to do an episode on sleep optimization because it's been a huge part of my life. I've had to figure it out because initially mine wasn't good. And I've really learned how to decode a lot of that, and it's life-changing. I would say a lot of snacking. Most people, you've got to stop the snacking. Snacking is going to make you insulin resistant. Every time you eat, your body has to pump out some insulin. So this is where intermittent fasting is quite a useful tool for improving insulin sensitivity. So whether you do like one 24-hour fast a week or you do like a 16 and 8 protocol every day, the only time I would say that snacking or eating smaller meals is acceptable is generally in elderly populations with people that have digestive issues. If you are 60, 70, 80 and you have digestive issues, often it's easier to have smaller little meals so you don't get bloated and feel terrible. But sometimes you will still be trading off insulin sensitivity for it. That's where you really want to focus on whole foods. You don't want to be eating sandwiches and toast and just the typical normal person foods. You need to be on macro bowl stuff, rainbow veg, foods with one ingredient as much as you can. Outside of that, I will tell you that this is a process. It will take time, but I promise you, you pull these levers that I've shared in this episode, and as you become more insulin sensitive, everything improves. It's like a positive feedback loop. So then all of a sudden, you start to have more energy. Your cravings will go down. That's going to fuel more fat loss. As you lose more body fat, you become more insulin sensitive. As you become more insulin sensitive, you get less brain fog. As you get less brain fog, you perform at an even higher level. As you perform at a higher level, you can get more stuff done. You feel more accomplished. Your mood improves. As your mood improves, you connect with your family in a more loving way. When you do that, your life changes. So I want you to realize that this is more than just a number in a blood test. This is one of the most important things that you will have to do with your health. And that the people that take this seriously and pull the levers that I share in these podcasts, they're the ones that are going to change your life. So guys, go out there today. Pull these levers. Insulin sensitivity. Tell people about this episode. Share this. And please, if you got some value out of this, go and leave a review for me. Share it. Tag me on social media. I love seeing when people immerse themselves in this knowledge. And remember, at the end of the day, we have a choice. You know, we can sit back and just be a normal person with normal person habits and come up with normal person results, or we can truly go out there and become that business athlete, a freaking lighthouse, an example of what it looks like to be an absolute leader. And I know that I'm choosing the latter, and I want that for you too.